There was no one to help him. Oswald was going to have to figure out how to fight the situation and solve this problem himself. At recess, he sat on a bench by the playground, grateful that he didn't have to pretend to listen to a teacher and could just think. He couldn't imagine how his life could get any weirder. The yellow thing seemed to think it was his father, and as weird enough, everyone else did as well. Do you mind if I share your bench? It was a girl Oswald had never seen before. She had curly black hair, big brown eyes, and holding a thick book. Sure, help yourself. The girl sat on the opposite end of the bench, opened her book. Oswald went back to being his confusing thoughts. Have you gone to this school for a long time? The girl asked him after a few minutes. She didn't look over at Oswald as she talked. She just kept staring at the pages of her book. Oswald wondered if it might be that she's shy. Since kindergarten, he said, and then, because he didn't really think of a single other thing to say about himself, he asked, What are you reading? Greek mythology, she said. Tales of heroes. Have you read much mythology? No, not really, he said, finding stupid immediately after. He didn't want to give the impression that he was the kind of guy that never read books and described. He added, I love to read, though, and then he felt even stupider. Me too, she said. I've probably read this book a dozen times. It's like a comfort book for me. I read it when I need to be brave. The word brave stuck a chord in Oswald. Brave was what he needed to be, too. Why is that? Well, the Greek heroes are super brave. They're always doing battle with some kind of big monster like the Minotaur or the Hydra. It kind of puts things into perspective, you know? No matter how big my problems are, at least I don't have to do battle with a monster. Yeah, Oswald said, even though he was trying to figure out how to do battle with a monster. A yellow, long-eared monster. In his own home, he couldn't tell the girl about the yellow thing, though. She would think he was crazy and would be leaving their shared bench in a hurry. So, you said you read that book when you need to be brave. He was surprised when he was having this conversation given the way his mind was racing. For some reason, this girl was easy to talk to. I mean, it may be none of my business, but I was wondering why you needed to be brave. She gave a shy little smile. First day of a new school. Third day in a new town. I don't know anyone yet. Yes, you do, he said as he held his hand. I'm Oswald. He didn't know why he was offering his hand like he was some kind of businessman, but it felt like the right thing to do. She took his hand out and shook it. I'm Gabriella. Somehow this was a conversation Oswald had needed to have. He took the bus home from school. When he came inside, the yellow thing was vacuuming the living room. He didn't ask it any more questions. It wasn't as if it was could give him any answers anyway. Besides, if he was going to make his plan work, he was going to have to act like everything was normal. As anybody who had seen him in the fourth grade play knew, acting was not one of his talents. Instead, he did what he was supposed to do when life was normal. When his real dad was vacuuming the living room, he got a feather duster out of the clean closet and dusted a coffee table and the end tables and the lamps. He emptied the wastebasket and kneaded and threw pillows on the couch. Then he went to the kitchen and took out the trash and recycling. Once he was outside, it was tempting to run, but he knew running was not the answer. If anyone saw the yellow thing as his dad, no one would help him. The yellow thing would always catch him. He went back inside. His chores done, he walked right past the yellow thing. I'm going to chill out for a while before dinner, he said, even though the possibility of relaxing in any way was unimaginable. He went to the room, but he didn't close the door. Instead, he took off his shoes, sprawled out on the bed, and started drawing in a sketchbook. He didn't want to draw mechanical animals, but it seemed to be all he could draw. He shut his sketchbooks and started to read a manga, or at least pretended to. Normal. The plan could go only work if he acted like everything was normal. When the rabbit appeared at his doorway, he managed to knock to gasp, to beckon him the same way he would when he led him into the murder room at Freddy Fazbear's, and he followed into the kitchen. On the table was one of the grocery store pizzas his dad kept in the freezer, baked to a pleasurable golden brown. It was 2 glasses of fruit punch Oswald liked. The pizza had already been sliced, which was a relief because Oswald couldn't imagine what he would have done if he had seen the thing holding a knife. Run screaming into the streets, probably. Oswald sat down on the table and helped himself to a slice of pizza. He didn't feel like eating, but he knew he couldn't act like anything was wrong. He took a bite of the pizza and sipped punch. "Ain't you gonna eat anything, Dad?" he asked, hard calling the thing Dad. But he managed. The yellow thing sat across from him in silence, with an unblinking stare and unfrozen grin. An untouched pizza slice on the plate in front of him, besides an untouched glass of punch. Could it even eat? Oswald wondered. Did it need to? What was it anyway? At first he thought it was a guy in a suit, but now he wasn't so sure. Was it kind of a highly stereotypical animatronic animal? Or a real flesh and blood giant rabbit? He didn't know which possibility was the most disturbing. With great effort, he finished the pizza slice and glass of punch, then said, "Thanks for the dinner, Dad. I'm going to get a glass of milk and go do my homework now." The yellow thing just sat there. Oswald went to the refrigerator and checked to make sure the yellow thing wasn't watching and pouring some milk into a bowl. Once he sat in his room, he didn't close and lock the door because he wouldn't if he were at home with his dad. Normal. Normal so as not to arouse suspicion. He slid the bowl of milk under the bed where Jinx was still hiding. "It's gonna be okay, girl," he whispered, hoping he was right. He sat on his bed and in a few minutes head to Jinx's lap with the milk. He knew the past experience that even when terrified he couldn't turn down a dairy product. He made a heartfelt attempt to hit his homework, but he couldn't concentrate. All he could think about was his dad, the yellow thing that dragged his dad into the pit under the surface. Did this mean his dad was in Freddy Fazbear's circus in 1985, wandering around an arcade of games that he had played as a kid? That was the most likely explanation, unless the yellow thing he had killed. No, he couldn't let himself think that. His dad wouldn't be alive. He would be. The only thing he knew was to go back into the pit, but first he was going to have to get out of the house without the yellow thing noticing. Oswald waited until dark, then waited until more finally he grabbed his shoes and tiptoed out of the room into the hallway in shocked feet. The door to his parents' room was open. He sneaked a glance inside and crept past the yellow thing was lying on the back of his parents' bed. It appeared to be staring at the ceiling. Or maybe it wasn't staring. Maybe it was asleep. It was hard to tell since his eyes didn't close. Did he even need to sleep? Holding his breath, he passed his parents' room and tiptoed into the kitchen. If the yellow thing caught him, he could always say he was just getting a drink of water. The kitchen was the best escape route. The door was less sneaky than the front door. He slipped into his shoes and pulled the door open, slowly, inch by inch. When it was open just wide enough, he slipped through shut it in softly behind him. Then he ran. He ran through the neighborhood and past the neighbors walking their dog and the kids riding their bikes. Some people looked at Oswald strangely as he couldn't figure out why. People ran in this neighborhood all the time, but Then he realized he wasn't running like he was doing for exercise. He was running like something was chasing him, and it might be. As he was a long way to Jeff's on foot, and Oswald knew that he couldn't keep up the pace all the way, he showed to a walk after he was out of the neighborhood and chose to walk side streets beside a more direct route as he'd been hard to follow. He was afraid Jeff's pizza might be closed by the time they reached it, but when he arrived, hot and out of breath, the light sign was still open. Inside, Jeff was at the corner, watching a ball game on TV, and otherwise, the place was empty. We just serve whole pizzas at night. No slices, Jeff said in usual monotone, as though he looked exhausted. Yeah, I just stopped by to get a soda to go, Oswald said as he glanced in the room with roped off ball pit. Jeff looked at a little puzzled, but finally said, "Okay, let me get a pick out of the oven, then I'll get it for you. Orange, right? Yeah, thanks." As soon as Jeff disappeared into the kitchen, Oswald ran to the back corner and dove into the pit. The familiar musty smell filled his nose, and he stank further into the surface. He sat in the ball pit and counted to 100, as he always did, even though he wasn't sure to serve any purpose in getting him to make the jump to Freddy Fazbear's in 1985. He shifted in his pit floor and felt something solid press against his lower back. A shoe. Felt like the sole of a shoe. He stooped up and grabbed it, and as a boot, a, a steel-toed work boot like his dad used to wear to the work mill, and now wore it to his job at Snack Space. He moved his hand up a little to an ankle. An ankle with his kind of thick boot sock and his dad liked. He curled further across the floor onto the pit. The face he had to feel the face. If it was a giant furry head, like a yellow thing, he might never stop screaming, but he had to find out. His hand found the shoulder, and he reached up to his chest and felt the cheap fabric of a white undershirt. He was shaking as he reached higher. He felt an unmistakable human face, skin and scrubbled, a man's face. Was it Dad? And was he... He had to be alive. He had to be. Oswald has seen shows where people who had been in emergency situations suddenly developed amazing strength and found themselves able to lift the front end of a car and a tractor. This was the kind of strength Oswald needed to find. His dad wasn't a big man, but he was still a man and weighed at least twice as much as his son. He could have to move his dad as if he was going to save him. If this even was his dad, if it wasn't some kind of cruel hoax set up by the yellow thing to trap him. Oswald couldn't let himself think of these thoughts, not if he was going to do what he had to. He got behind the person, grabbed the under of his armpits, and pulled. Nothing happened. Dead weight. Oswald thought, no, not dead. Please, not dead. He pulled again, this time with more force, making a noise, and it was somewhere between a grunt and a roar. This time, the body moved, and Oswald pulled again, standing up, going to the person's head and shoulders above the surface. It was his dad, pale and unconscious, but breathing, deftly breathing, and around them, not Freddy Fazbear in 1980, but the normal, present-day weirdness of Jeff's Pizza. How could Oswald get him out? Could he call Mom? As a nurse, she would know what to do, but what if she thought he was crazy or lying? What if he felt like the boy who cried wolf, or the boy who cried rabbit? He felt it before he saw it. The presence behind him, the awareness of something in his personal space. Before he could turn around, a pair of furry yellow arms locked around him in a fearsome embrace. He got his right arm free enough to jab his elbow into the yellow thing's midsection. He got loose, but the thing was blocking the exit to the pit. He couldn't get out to the pit himself, or let alone his poor, passed-out dad. Acting more than thinking, Oswald changed at the rabbit and his head down. If he could throw it off, balance, or knock out under the surface, maybe he could make it end up in 1985. Fazbear buy Oswald and his dad some time to escape. He headbutted the thing and knocking into the ropes and netting the surface of the ball pit. It stumbled a little and right itself, and then arms outstretched, lungs towards Oswald. It pushed Oswald and against the wall of the pit, its eyes dead as always. It unhinged its jaw to unveil double rows of fangs as sharp as sectrums, mouth open freakishly wide. It lunged for Oswald's throat, but it blocked it with his arms. Pain pierced Oswald's forehead arm as the yellow thing sank its fangs into his skin. Oswald used his good arm to punch the rabbit hard in the face before the fangs pierced too deeply. Fangs? What kind of crazy rabbit has fangs? The thing released their grip, but then there was no time to survey the damage because the thing was lunging towards Oswald's dad, its jaw wide open like a snake, but it swallowed an unsuspecting prey. Its fangs were red with Oswald's blood. Oswald bowed the yellow thing aside to move between it and his still unconscious father. "You leave my dad alone!" he yelled, and then used the netting to bounce off and clamber onto the yellow thing's back. He hit its head on his fist and stretched its eyes where it didn't feel like leaving creature's eyes. The rabbit stumbled back into the netting and the rope, then grabbed Oswald's arm and slung him hard off its shoulders and into the pit. Oswald fell head first under the surface, greeting that the bottom of the pit was soft. His arm was throbbing, his whole body was exhausted, but he had to get up. He had to save his dad, like those ancient Greek heroes Gabriella had told him about. He had to be brave, face the monsters. Oswald arose, unstable to his feet, somehow. When I stood Oswald off, the yellow thing must have gotten tangled in the ropes, netting the line of the ball pit. A rope lunged around its neck and grasped the rope. It was a big paw trying to free Oswald. Couldn't understand why it was failing to free itself until he saw the yellow thing's feet were touching the floor of the pit. The yellow thing was suspended from the rope, which was entirely securely into a metal rod at the top of the ball pit. The rabbit was hanged itself. Its mouth was open and closing like it was gasping for air, but no sound came out. Its paws clawed and desperately the rope. It stared, still terrifying, and its blankness was aimed in Oswald's direction, as if it was asking him for help. Oswald certainly wasn't going to rescue it. After a few more seconds of struggling, the yellow thing was still. Oswald blinked. Hanging from the rope was nothing but a dirty, empty, yellow rabbit costume. His dad's eyes opened. Oswald rushed to his side. "I don't understand why I'm here," Dad said, his face pale and unshaved. Pesky dark half moon across under him. "What happened?" Oswald debated what to say. "You were attacked and left for dead by a giant evil rabbit who tried to replace you, and I was the only person that could see it, and it wasn't. Even Lon thought it was you." No, it sounded crazy, and Oswald didn't realize the idea of spending years in therapy saying, "But the evil rabbit was real." Jinx was the only other member of the family who really knew this truth, and being a cat, she wasn't going to say anything in his defense. Besides, his dad was already suffered enough. Oswald knew that it was wrong to lie. He also knew that lying was not a skill he had. When he tried, he always go all nervous and sweaty and say, a lie, but this situation, a lie might be the only way forward. He took a deep breath. "So, I hid in the ball pit to play a prank on you, which I shouldn't have done. You came to look for me, and I guess you must have hit your head and lost consciousness." Oswald took a deep breath. "I'm sorry, Dad. I didn't mean for things to get so out of hand." This part, at least, was the truth. I accept your apology, son, Dad said. He didn't sound mad, just tired. But you're right. You shouldn't have done it. And Jeff really should get rid of this ball pit before his lawsuit's on his hands. Definitely, Oswald said. He knew he would never set foot in the pit again, and he would miss Chip and Mike. But he needed to make some friends in his own time. His mind flashed to the girl on the bench in recess. Gabrielle. She seemed nice. Smart, too. They had a good time. Oswald reached for his father's hand. Let me help you stand up. With Oswald standing him, his dad rose at his feet and let his son lead him to the exit of the ball pit. He paused and looked up on the hanging yellow costume. What is that creepy thing? I have no idea. This, too, was true. They climbed out of the pit and walked through Jeff's pizza. Jeff was wiping the counter, still watching the ball game at his restaurant's TV. He had not seen or heard anything. Still holding Oswald's arm when the last thing and his dad had in his hand, he lifted his son's arm and looked at it. You're bleeding. Yeah, he said. I must have scraped my arm when I was trying to pull you out of the pit. His dad shook his head. Like I said, that thing is a public safety issue. It just sticking out a sign saying "Keep out" isn't enough. He let out Oswald's arm. Well, get your arm cleaned into the house. Then your mom can dress it wound once she gets home from work. Oswald wondered what his mom would say when she saw fang marks. As they approached the front door, Oswald said, Dad, I know I could be a pain sometimes, but I really do love you, you know? Dad looked at him with an expression that seemed both pleased and surprised. Same here, kiddo. He ruffled Oswald's hair. But you do have a terrible taste in science fiction movies. Oh, yeah? Oswald said, smiling. Well, you have a terrible taste in music. And like boring ice creams. Together they opened the door and the fresh night air behind them. Jeff called, Hey kid, you forgot your drink.